Nairobi University in Kenya. He is fluent in English, Russian, and French, and also has working knowledge of Italian and Portuguese. Dr. Alabo is married to our wonderful Dr. Fatima Alabo, who is the vice president of our school, and they are blessed with 2 adult children and a grandson. Dr. Alabo, you have the floor to give us your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my sister Shika. And a very good evening to all of you. Good evening to the Vice President of South University College. Good evening to our esteemed facilitators all the way from Uganda, my very good friends, Dr. Rosalind and Ms. Patricia.
Dr. Alabo, can you go a little louder on your speaker, please?
All right, I will. So, and I welcome all of you. Can you hear me now? Guests, faculty, students, and the members of the public who are joining us at this seminar today. Am I clear enough?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. It's a great honor and as well as a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this very distinguished guest seminar series that is hosted by Salt University College. At a time when our world is experiencing profound and rapid transformations, higher education remains an invaluable platform not only for acquiring knowledge, but also for building a society founded on justice, integrity, and inclusive development. This seminar that we are having today is part of our commitment to creating spaces where ideas can flourish, critical issues can be examined, and a culture of lifelong learning can thrive. The subject of today's discussion, you all agree, that is corruption, human rights, and development in Africa, is very topical and important. The convergence of these challenges significantly affects the continent's advancement, stability, and the welfare of its populace. Combating corruption, safeguarding human rights, and promoting sustainable development are not distinct objectives. In fact, they are intricately connected endeavors that influence the lives of millions and dictate the future of our various communities, nations, and continents. South University College is committed to helping students and the wider community become informed and engaged citizens who can contribute to resolving complicated situations. This seminar will be facilitated by guest speakers with extensive experience, knowledge, and enlightening viewpoints. Their views will prompt us to critically evaluate the values and actions characterizing our societies today and the roles which our societies are playing, particularly given Africa's evolving growth and transformation context. I invite each one of us to fully participate in today's discussion. Please ask questions and reflect on how we, individually and collectively, can help steer Africa towards a future that is marked by transparency, respect for human rights, and sustainable development. I thank you for joining us today from wherever you are. Your active participation in this guest seminar is crucial to the success of the seminar itself. Let's maximize this unique opportunity to learn, engage, and inspire positive change together. Once more, it is my very pleasurable responsibility to welcome all of you to this month's guest seminar. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a blessed hearing, engaging, and contributing to the success of the seminar. Thank you all very much, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alabo. Thank you so much. I wish to acknowledge the presence of all the other members of faculty, the members of the trusteeship of the school, as well as students of Salt University College. Now, let me give you very quickly a few housekeeping matters. I want to be aware that, our speakers have about 20 minutes each to speak during the presentation. Our attendees can post their questions in the chat or wait till the Q&A session where they would raise their hands and be given the chance to speak. All mics, please, all mics should be kept on mute during the presentation so that you can unmute when you have raise your hand and are given the floor. Now, I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests, who are two ladies, very accomplished, from Uganda. And we are going to try and keep this at a fast pace because Uganda is about 2 hours ahead of Accra. So therefore, they are, by the time we end, it's going to be late into the night. So we're going to keep it at a fast pace. So please keep your questions very succinct and to the point. To introduce our speakers, I will start with Dr. Rosalind Karugonjo Segawa. She is a versatile, analytical, and conscientious lawyer. She is the chairperson of the inaugural Leadership Code Tribunal. Before this appointment, she worked as the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Uganda Christian University, where she taught human rights and international humanitarian law. Dr. Rosalind also was previously a worker for over 12 years with the Uganda Human Rights Commission, where she served in several posts such as Director of the Directorate of Monitoring and Inspections, Registrar, Senior Human Rights Officer and volunteer. She was a guest researcher at the Danish Institute for Human Rights and also worked as a law clerk at the Legal Aid Clinic of the Law Development Center. She is a board member of Penal Reform International and serves as the Secretary General. She holds a Doctor of Laws and a Master of Laws from the University of Pretoria, South Africa, a postgraduate diploma in law, Law Development Center, Kampala, Uganda, and a Bachelor of Laws degree, LLB, with honors from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. That is our Dr. Rosalind for you. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Patricia, who is going to be opening the floor. Dr. Patricia, are you with us? Yes, wonderful.
Yes.
Miss Patricia, I already called you doctor, so you know what to do next. Miss Patricia Nduru holds a Master of Laws in Public International Law from Leiden University in the Netherlands. She has a diploma in legal practice, Law Development Center, Uganda, and Bachelor of Law honors, Makerere University, Uganda. Miss Patricia Nduru is lecturer of international law, human rights law, and international humanitarian law at the Uganda Christian University, Mukono, and an evaluator and judge of the International Bar Association, International Criminal Court Moot Court Competition, Grotius Center for International Legal Studies, Leiden University, and International Bar Association. These very accomplished ladies are going to be speaking to us today about corruption, human rights, and development in Africa. And we are going to be starting with Miss Patricia Nduru. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. All participants and the staff, management, and students of Salt University and everyone online. We'll just go straight into this. And I've been told to be a doctor by the facilitator. So what we're going to do, we thought it was very important and paramount to just start with this whole notion of human rights, this whole concept of human rights. And please, my presentation will be sent to you. There's a soft copy of this presentation. And what I'm going to do is really summarize what's in that presentation. So for those who will be interested to read further, you'll have a soft copy of the presentation will be there. There's a PowerPoint. We thought it very important that we should dispel misconceptions. When we're dealing with human rights, people always tell us what. And when we have a group of people, we can almost get an answer from everyone, what they think human rights is. So let's dispel the misconceptions. Human rights basically are just your moral and legal entitlements, which are inherent to you as a human being, irrespective of your race, origin, political, social affiliation. So one of the things that we have found as we've gone along is this whole concept of what is moral and legal and inherent is being put to question. Over the years, there's been a push where some schools think that, well, it's just only legal. Let's only deal with the legal aspect. And they provide for these things in their laws and completely discard the moral. Or others think, let's only deal with morals, and there's nothing legal about them. But these misconceptions about what is entitled to you by virtue of being a human being, and that is very inherent to your nature, have been disputed over years. So for some, I think you've heard this before. Well, there were laws on the books, but there was slavery. There was apartheid. So what was the issue? They could not link the moral entitlement and the fact that it was inherent, is very inherent in everyone's nature. Others are like, no, we'll just deal with the legal. Let's just deal with morals. And they forget that there is a legal aspect of these human rights that we're talking about. I keep telling people human rights are not about feelings. Human rights is also about law. So in a nutshell, and we have to have this concept very clear from the beginning, that you have moral and legal entitlements, which are inherent because you're a human being. And once you have not concretized that, you're going to move left, north, south, and believe any concept of human rights that is brought to you. So you have to have the proper concept for you to have the proper narrative. So this is one of the things that we want to clearly put and outline, because people come up with all sorts of definitions. But you have moral, legal entitlements, and they're inherent because you're a human being. So as we move, I just wanted to talk about the different responses in different communities trying to pick on this thing called being inherent. And over the years, we've found it very interesting that, for instance, what was Africa? Africa from the north to south, huge pre-colonial empires, very huge. Where was their focus? They focused on things to do with education, food production, all these things.
Patricia,
yes, please.
Can you please raise your volume a little bit? Thank you.
Okay, I think it's at my max. Let me try to be louder. So they focused on economic, social, food, shelter, and water. But once again, the very notion of rights being inherent was missing. So if you go back and look into your societies, any of our societies, where we come from pre-colonial, you're going to look at things with water, the food storage, economic activities, health, all these things were there. But inherent, that was missing. If you go and look in what was happening in Europe, this was more about whatever came up was about containing the powers of absolute monarchs. Okay? So people are saying, no, I have freedom of speech, I have freedom of religion. So please contain your power. Inherent? Not really. If you go to what was happening in the Middle East with with maybe some of you who are Bible scholars, with Cyrus, for instance, when he said people are free, they can go and practice their religion and all that, the inherent nature was still not really clear. They provided for different rights. You're free from slavery, you can go and worship, but the inherent nature was still missing. So one of the things that we want to clarify as this whole move that is going on, you have to locate human rights within a legal and a moral framework that is inherent to every being, to every human being. I'll quickly skip to something that we have discussed. For people, they're like, oh, we do not want to know about theoretical things to do with theories. What underpins this whole ideology, I think, is very important for us. As in a training where someone says, mentioned and pointed out that Winston Churchill said, the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. Ideology is pertinent. Pertinent. Because ideology determines everything else. So as we are moving, it's very important to know, what are these ideologies out there? And what are you as an individual? What am I as an individual offering or promoting? So some of these ideologies, some of you may know them. But for instance, when we talk about things that come from natural law, what are we saying? That the law is from a divine being. There's authority, there's a moral authority backing this law. Very pertinent. There are other ideologies, all right, which we call, for those who know, the positivists, who say, no, there's nothing moral, it's just the law. Okay, as long as this law is going to help us contribute to our well-being, it's fine. And I think very easily you can slide in propagating ideologies that you're not even aware of. So, what's the ideology? What is the narrative that we're supposed to have? This law has to be backed by a divine authority. That's why we call it moral. And then there are legal entitlements. So it's very important that even today, if you see what's going around the global scene, it is a battle for minds. It's a battle of ideologies. Are we just saying human rights are just coming from the law, so we can prescribe anything in the law? Or do we say there's a moral code to what we call human rights? So thirdly, that is very important, that we have to have our ideologies very clear, very, very clear, as we are talking about rights. And that's what we call the theoretical, what you call ideological, theoretical, very, very key for us. Then, very quickly, I need to also dispel some misconceptions. When people talk about human rights, it's like we're going on a journey of fun. Okay? Rights come with obligations. I've had people say, I have human rights, like they do not have any obligations. You do have obligations. Okay? And rights can be restricted. So for instance, if you want to go and assemble, please, you're free to assemble. But there may be certain restrictions. Rights are not absolute. So there are restrictions that govern rights. Rights do not equate to lawlessness. Rights doesn't mean you're lawless. We keep on saying the best framework for the promotion of human rights is where there's a rule of law. So if you want to assemble, then there are also certain guidelines. Don't infringe my rights if you're coming to assemble. I have a small shop. You can do what you want, but I stay trading. Rights can be restricted for issues around public order, public conscience, and other things. So I also want to dispel that notion, because people come and say, I know I have a right to this. Yes, you may have a right to it, but your rights can be restricted, they can be limited. And there are certain rights that we will say won't be restricted, which are maybe issues like torture or fair trial. Those are specific rights that cannot be derogated from. That is just very simple. So I thought it was very important for us. There's a lot of material in the presentation that you can read, that we have a very clear concept of what are we talking about when we're talking about human rights. The second notion that I want to dispel is that Africa had rights that it promoted and protected. And these were mostly economic. So you had environment, all these things. Okay? So human rights is not a foreign issue. We had them here. We just didn't call them rights. We knew them as how we run our societies. Thirdly, ideology. What's behind the ideology? What's behind that? What are we propagating should be very clear. And avoid the thin line where you're pushing morality out of rights. Fourthly, rights doesn't mean you're lawless. There are limitations to what you can do. So that is just a nutshell of human rights, in a nutshell. And then I want to go to something that we are passionate about, which is the human rights-based approach, and which Rosin will further go into. So the human rights-based approach, I'm going to give you a story. Some time back, people are like, why the human rights-based approach? What's she even talking about? But let me give you this scenario. Some time back, there were interventions in the village, up country. We call them villages. You may be calling them up country, the interventions. And the intervention was specifically to provide water to a community. So these people came, so this community looked and said, the ladies seem to be walking very far to fetch water. So what are we going to do? They said, no, we're going to build, boreholes and all these things to bring water close to the women. Very good idea. Everyone on the call would agree. And they did so. When they came to evaluate, they found that that water had never been used. Why? No one bothered to inquire from these women if they actually needed that water near them. When they asked them, the women said, you know what? We like walking far away. Why? Because it's a time when we can share our issues of our husbands with each other. And no one ever thought that that long distance was a place where they canceled each other. So that brings into question the human rights-based approach. And just to point, in the past, there were different approaches. Welfare, oh, you need blankets, they bring blankets. Oh, the next approach, we just need to empower. Let's empower people, let's empower people. But these approaches haven't worked. So what's the human rights-based approach? Simply, we're saying put the individual at the center of planning and programming. I remember in our past interventions with different ministries, and one of the hardest people to convince about human rights are maybe planners. So we go to a planner and the planner saying, I'm planning for this community. And you're like, yes, I can see your plan. But who are you planning for? You're planning for that woman. Okay, so if you're planning for that woman, did you even ask her if she wanted this borehole? And guess what the answer would be? No. We know what she wants. You do not know what people want. I like development. I've been telling people I love development. I love roads. But of recent, when I move up country and I look, I see our roads are used to dry food, cassava, etc. Did people ever ask what that community needed? No. So the human rights-based approach is basically a concept, all right, that says we need to put individuals at the center of development. And this includes everything that pertains to them, including all their rights. So for that woman, she should have been at the center of this plan, of this development plan. So if you put her at the center of that plan, you're going to find out, A, what's this woman's need? So the human rights-based approach basically has 5 principles. One is the principle, we call them panel, participation. So you place the person at the center to find out what is the need of this person. The need of these women wasn't water. The need of these women were maybe counseling services. So put the person at the center. Find out why are they behaving a certain way? What underpins that? They'll tell you, you know what? There are issues at home. So the intervention will not just be water. It will be someone who can provide those counseling services. So we want the human rights-based approach let the right holder, the person you're planning for, be put at the center. Let them be participate. Do not leave them behind. Secondly, the next principle is accountability. So who's responsible for what? If you're going to take that same scenario, you're going to be like, yes, water, there's a ministry responsible. But more important, maybe it's another ministry responsible for family and gender issues. Okay? So who's responsible for what? Right to the last person. The other issue is non-discrimination, because it's panel, participation, accountability, non-discrimination. So you do not discriminate on any grounds. And discrimination is very easy. It can be overt or something even you do not think about. But you place people in a worse situation than they actually were. Or you do not even include them in those policies. Next is empowerment, which is the last. Empower people with the knowledge. They could have been given that group of women could have been given knowledge. We're coming to set up this, and then you get all this. And finally is L, which we call the legal framework, which talks about the laws. So we will go back and look at what's provided for in our various laws, in our constitutions, and whatever government has ratified or agreed to be bound by. So that is a human rights-based approach. 5 principles panel, put an individual at the center of development. Panel. Participation, accountability, non-discrimination, and is for the legal framework that you have. That's the laws, that's all that you have in your country. So I just want to finally, because I have 5 minutes remaining, just finally wrap up.
We had 5 minutes 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, so I think I have 2 minutes now or 1. But just to wrap up what I like this saying, and it was by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1958. She says, where do universal human rights begin? In small places to home, close, so small, they cannot be seen on any map in the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood you live in, the college you attend. And she said, unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere else. So our charge to you, even as we've talked about this, is also for us to be able to reflect and say, do you actually promote human rights in your backyard? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Patricia. That was so much food for thought. And it's really compelling, very compelling. I really enjoyed it. And I never even heard of this panel thing, and how we can work with the individual at the center. Thank you so much. I'm sure they have the attendants have so many questions for you, but now let us go to Dr. Rosalind, who is going to take us through the other aspects of this topic, which is corruption and development in Africa, I suppose. Dr. Rosalind, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm very, very sorry that you can't see me moving. You can't see me moving live like you saw, Patricia. I've covered that up with my with my image, which I hope you will find satisfactory. And I will be sharing with you via PowerPoint, and I hope that you'll find that satisfactory. But let me go through the preliminaries. Thank you very much, Sika, for inviting me to speak. Thank you so much to Dr. Kozo Alobo. It's great to see you here. And please send a warm regard to Dr. Fatma. I hope I can be heard, by the way. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Maybe you can make yourself a little louder.
Okay. I was saying that I am very excited to be here, and I send out warm greetings to Dr. Kozo Alobo. It's great to see you. Please send warm regards to your dear wife. Patricia and I are grateful to be here. Good evening to our wonderful audience. How are you doing? Thank you so much for sparing time to be with us. And it's great for me to be here. I've been excited ever since I got the invite. I knew that it was going to be a great day for me. By way of introduction, let me first stop the share because everything went stiff when I did that. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
Dr.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So today we are talking about corruption.
Dr. Rosalind, we lost your presentation.
Yes, you did. And that's probably because it's not moving. It wasn't moving when I was on, so that is how you lost it. But nevertheless, let me share. I will share the presentation later because if in the process of setting all that up, there will be I don't want to lose time on that. But good evening to you all, and I'm happy to be here. The topic is corruption, human rights, and development in Africa. I want to start from where Patricia left off, and I learned something from you, Patricia. You may be surprised because we've been in this field together. You taught me the panel, and I'm going to teach you about Panther. Panther, I'm stopping where you left off about panel, which is participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, and the legal framework. I approach it with Panther, and it's really just affirming what you said, Patricia. It's about participation, accountability, non-discrimination, transparency, respect for human rights, the H is for human rights, empowerment, and rule of law. And together, those two things, panel and Panther, provide the human rights-based approach to development. But for today, I'm going to speak about corruption, human rights, and development. I will begin by telling you that corruption is one of the greatest challenges we have. And why is it a challenge? It's because it threatens the well-being, the prosperity and stability of the citizenry in Africa, because it affects socio-economic development, which stifles the work of democratic institutions and weakens the rule of law, which ultimately leads to the violation of human rights. And when we talk of corruption, I was telling Sika earlier that anybody can make this lecture because we've all been victims of corruption. And it's not a subject that anyone you got walking on the street can tell you what corruption is. But here I refer to it as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. You are entrusted with power, you're in a public office or in a place where you provide a public service, but you use that power for private gain. And of course, examples are numerous. Who were to pick and call on anyone on the call that, for you, what's your experience of corruption? You'll hear people give all kinds of examples. If you go to hospital, you're going to a government hospital where everything is supposed to be provided. The medicine is provided, but then you'll find that somebody is busy asking you for money to pay for the medicine, yet the medicine has already been provided. Or you'll find because the doctor is in that office, they decide to steal the medicine and take it to their private clinic. Or they decide to replace the new medicine with medicine that has expired or is about to expire. Of course, I'm now concentrating a lot on the health sector because a lot of corruption goes on there, and it is unchecked. It could be about you're in a public office and you're only giving jobs to your relatives. That is a conflict of interest. Maybe even the relatives are not even qualified, but they're the only ones that you're giving jobs. That is corruption. And corruption has many facets, which we can't all finish. The human rights, Patricia really laid a good, foundation, and she talked about them being moral and legal entitlements for human beings. These human rights are legal entitlements for every human being, regardless of your nationality, of your gender, of your origin, of your color, of your religion. And they accrue to us simply because we are human beings. You're a human being, you have rights. And as she said, rights come with obligations. I have nothing useful to add to her definition of human rights, and I endorse it in all its entirety. We move on to development. When we talk about development, many people think about it in terms of buildings going up, roads being built, but really it's supposed to be a comprehensive economic, social, cultural, and political process, which ultimately aims at improving our lives. Are our lives improved with those buildings? If they are not, then that is not development. Development should be able to improve the well-being of the entire population and individuals on the basis of their active, free, and meaningful participation. Apart from improving their lives, as Patricia was saying, that you must ensure that they participate in this development. As a matter of fact, I wrote my Doctor of Laws thesis was on the right to participation in development, and it's readily available online. You can just Google participation in development and my names, and that dissertation will come up from the University of Pretoria. But I was talking about the right for people to participate in development planning, because development is supposed to improve our well-being. So when people do not participate in it, you find that there is no fair distribution of benefits that are resulting from there. Even if it is oil, you find it will benefit a few, or some health checks may not be done, environmental checks may not be done, human rights assessments may not be done. People are only concentrating on the development or getting money out of it. But at the end of the day, every development process must be able to improve our lives. So in Africa, as you all know, it's unfortunate, but it is true. I believe that as much as we have a history of protecting human rights in our communities, unfortunately, post-colonial period, human rights are mostly declaratory. They are only proclaimed in constitutions and other laws, rather than being conclusive or definite in practice because of our political and social economic context. So, although as Africans, for us, development has always been an aspiration, and it has always been, especially after colonial subordination, development still remains a challenge. And you find that although Africa has a wealth of natural resources, we are very undeveloped, and we are either undeveloped or remain underdeveloped, because many of our nations suffer from corruption, political instability, civil unrest, war, and poverty. But as a continent, development remains an aspiration, and it is not only an aspiration, it is the right. We are the only continent that has endorsed development as a right, and that is how important development to us. Unfortunately for us, of course, development is affected by corruption. Corruption is a major issue. And I suppose I've been blessed that I've had to work with the Human Rights Commission. At the Human Rights Commission, I was involved in promoting and protecting human rights. And by the grace of God, I'm now working with the Leadership Code Tribunal in Uganda. The Leadership Code Tribunal brings public officers to book. If you breach the Leadership Code of Conduct, the Inspector General of Government investigates the issue. If, in their opinion, they find you could have breached, they bring you to the tribunal, and it is the tribunal that determines the punishment that public officer can have. So the punishments we give at the tribunal range from a fine. It can also be you could lose your job. We could ask that you vacate. We could ask you to return what you have stolen and things like that. So now I've also had experience in the corruption world. But in Africa, speaking of the whole continent, the 2023 Corruption Perception Index report for Africa showed that corruption remains a significant challenge across the continent. And according to Transparency International, most African countries, they are either stagnant or failing to make progress against corruption. imagine, and I know many of you are students, and some of you have, or most of us have been students, but can you imagine that in terms of corruption, when we are marked on how well we are preventing it or avoiding it, most countries in Africa retained an average of 33%, and most of the countries were below 50%. You know that if you got below 50% in school, you don't pass. So most of us, most African countries are not passing. For those that are doing well, according to the report, in terms of the top ranking countries in Africa, according to Transparency International, number one is Seychelles. Seychelles got 71%. Number two is Cape Verde, which got 64%. Number three is Botswana, which had 59%. The rest of us are in the middle there. The lowest ranking, Somalia was at 11%, South Sudan at 13%, Equatorial Guinea at 17%. Those are the lowest ranking. So corruption is a major deal in Africa. It's a big, big, big problem. And corruption actually affects many issues. According to the report, they said corruption and associated issues within justice systems are major concerns. And because of corruption, there is a weakening of justice systems, leaving many countries vulnerable to corruption in various forms. And the corruption is coming up in various forms, such as political corruption, for example, the state capture, patronage networks, opaque political party financing, vote buying, and unresolved conflict of interest, and land corruption, among others. If you look deeply, you'll find that some of these problems are occurring in your own country. And government's ability to respect, protect, and promote human rights is often paralyzed by corruption, which of course affects the delivery of public services, access to justice, and protection of the citizenry. So corruption, if it's not checked, it will inevitably affect the enjoyment of rights, and it will especially affect economic, social, and cultural rights, such as the right to health, the right to education, and the right to housing. If you look at health, I already gave an example. I can also move to education. If the education sector is corrupt, imagine the people who are training medical doctors. If the people training medical doctors are not doing their bit, you find that in some institutions of higher learning, there is what they call sex for marks. So people are not reading, people are not studying, but because they're having sex with the lecturers and they're able to pass, yet they have not learned a single thing. And this is a person that is going to touch a precious being. This is a person that is going to deliver someone's child, and they haven't learned anything. They just went through school, but because of the corruption, because of the evil going on, because nowadays people are out to make a quick buck. They don't follow the standards. They may not follow the set standards by the council, the National Council for Higher Education. And even maybe when people come around to monitor and inspect, they will give the inspectors money so that their education institution is cleared, yet it is not fit for the purpose. So what kind of citizenry are we bringing out of our schools? It can affect other rights as housing. Of course, it results into, misuse of resources. And when resources are misused, inevitably rights are going to be violated. For example, if money has been given to build a hospital, money has been given to build a road, and somebody else pockets it, then we are not going to have a road, or we are not going to have a hospital. At the end of the day, life is going to be lost, whichever way. And corruption affects our well-being in magnitudes that we can't even imagine. And there is a way it puts those corrupt people in a privileged position while putting the citizenry in a disadvantaged position. And I believe that corruption can lead to revolutions. You see, when you don't put the citizenry at the forefront, you're going to have trouble. Many years ago, what caused the French Revolution was because there was a queen who could not really connect with the people. The people had no bread. That meant they didn't have the basics. And then she said, if they don't have bread, then let them eat cake. By the time you don't have what it takes to have bread, you definitely cannot have cake. This was one person that long time ago, she had, was it 500 pairs of shoes? So she was not really connecting. I believe there was some sense of, there was corruption there definitely, because she was, those in the king's court were eating so well while the citizenry were starving, and it led to a revolution because people can't take it. That is, and I mean, if we bring it to modern day, there've been revolutions in the Arab world, which led to change which led to changes in what in government. Quite recently in Uganda, I've seen people who were the youth hit the streets saying we are fed up of corruption. Things must change. Why is corruption bad? It's because it increases inequality and compromises service delivery and implementation of government projects. You see, when projects are not completed because public officials are cutting corners, and when public funds are regularly stolen, and the citizenry they lack the basics, they lack healthcare. And when the vulnerable are not assisted during disasters and they die, then rights to life and other rights are being violated. So when there are huge income disparities also because of corruption, because some people are stealing money. When there is corruption, nobody wants to invest in your country. In fact, when people check up and they see that this country is corrupt, nobody wants to invest. And at the end of the day, that affects economic growth and job creation. And the citizenry end up without basic socioeconomic services. So all these things are a cancer that we do need to handle. If you see in Africa, although we are wealthy, you find that the resources are diverted. You find a country like the DRC, which has so many minerals. It has it struggles. Many of its citizens struggle to access public services, and you find that in certain areas, rural areas, they struggle with a lot of poverty, inequality, and social injustice. And that's not just for DRC. The point was to say you can imagine the kind of wealth they have. They should not be going through what they are going through, but it is because of corruption. And corruption undermines democracy and good governance and sets African countries back economically. I want to emphasize that freedom from corruption is the human right, and the right to freedom from corruption should be promoted and protected in Africa. It is important that the victims of corruption and human rights violations get justice. That is very, very important, because when people don't get justice, that it sends a signal that this is the way that we should move. We've avoided, of course, talking about boring you too much with the legal framework and all, but it is important for us as concerned citizenry, as Africans, that we should know and promote a culture of transparency, accountability, and civic engagement. Many times people have said, corruption is part of African culture. Never. We were known for one thing, and the South Africans know it. They call it Ubuntu. And it's interesting, that word is also used in Uganda, Ubuntu, Ubuntu. The Baganda would say Ubuntu bulam, meaning we look out for each other, we care for each other. But but corruption, unfortunately, makes us forget that we are brothers and sisters. The way we lived pre-colonial, we've forgotten it. We've forgotten to take care of each other, and each one starts to look out for themselves through corruption. And it is important that we reflect on that and turn back to knowing that we are each other's keeper, so that we do not steal. And it starts with you. If you're on the road and you've done a traffic violation, and the policeman stops you, and he asks for your driving permit, and you know you're in the wrong, are you going to hand over the permit only, or you will squeeze in a little, I don't know, in your here, maybe a 20,000 shilling note? Are you going to put a note also, so that they don't fine you? Or you will actually bear it? If we can each take steps to say no, then corruption can stop. But when we keep giving, then the police officer will know, oh, I can actually earn a living from the road. I can just keep stopping cars which have faults, and I will let them go even when they are faulty and they can cause accidents leading to the death of many people. But all the policeman cares about is that somebody, once they are stopped, they will give them money, and that's all they care about. And at the end of the day, people may die. So it starts with us, each of us. When you can't get a service quickly, can you be patient, or are you going to pay? When you're waiting in queue for some people waiting for certain documents, and you see the lines are long, and and you want to quickly move on, do you pay a bribe, or will you wait in queue, try to follow due process? I know some people are going to tell you systems don't work, but we have to make them work. We need to reinforce and fortify anti-corruption, human rights and accountability institutions and mechanisms, so that we can effectively implement the law and ensure justice. And the other thing that we need to do is to protect whistleblowers, victims and witnesses of corruption and human rights, to promote access to justice. So I want to conclude by saying that it is important that the victims of corruption and human rights violations get justice at the national or regional and international levels. We, of course, have not really gone into the national. The national, all of you know it at your national level, you know where to go. But you also know that at the regional level, we have the African Union, and it also has its mechanisms that promote human rights. We have the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is in Banjul. We have the African Court on Human and People's Rights, which is in Arusha. We even have more regional courts closer. We have the East African Court of Justice. I believe in ECOWAS, there are some mechanisms. Even in the SADC, there are regional mechanisms where you can find justice. And also, there are also international mechanisms, including the UN, where you can get justice. And I think my time has run, and I want to thank you for listening to me. And I'm really, really looking forward to hearing the discussion and to answering questions, because obviously the time was short and I could not address everything that could have been on your mind. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Roslyn. I mean, I'm sure the attendants today, the people here with us today, our invited guests and the students, our faculty and everyone would agree that you've raised some very compelling questions. For me, what obviously took my attention, caught my attention, is this notion of the panel, and how your definition, especially of corruption, which is, you said it was the abuse of entrusted power for private gain, and how it was important to also, you came up with an acronym, which is PANTHER. But I think, Dr. Rosalind, I missed what the E in PANTHER stands for. I know it's participatory, accountability, non-discrimination, transparency, human rights, rule of law, but I couldn't catch what
empowerment.
the E
is for empowerment.
Exactly. And that would be the same as the E in panel, which is also participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, with giving people knowledge, and then the legal framework. Thank you so much. I would like to now open the floor for your questions. Now, please, you would only have to raise your hand using the icon for raising hand, and then you would be given the chance to talk. And please, once you ask your question, you can mute yourself. But before you ask, make sure you unmute, okay? Thank you very much. That was really good questions. Hello? Okay, if there are no questions at the moment, I would like to ask Patricia, are you with us?
I saw a question to Patricia in the chat from Asimwe Robinson. He says, Lawyer Patricia, since you spoke about imposed rights, please comment the minority rights the West is now pushing through the throats of our nations.
Okay, thank you so much,
It was to you, Patricia.
All right, let me comment on that. Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Mr. Asimwe. And I will just start from a place. Number one, Africa has to define, it has to be very clear what we define as rights. Okay? Mm-hmm. If Africa is saying it's legal and moral entitlements that are inherent, then within that definition, there's already a restriction. It's like a bar. So going forward, I think it's very important for us to know what we are, how we are contextualizing this whole rights issue. So it's legal and moral entitlements that are inherent. Secondly, we are aware that it's a battle for ideology. It's an ideological battle. So either you're going to have an ideological battle, getting out all morals or any legal restrictions, whatever it is. And Africa has to realize, or we have to realize, that ideologically, this is our stand. And just to point out that if you have that catchment and that criteria, that would be your guiding. It would guide you, and I think it has guided most of the governments this far. And within that, you can find, other measures. But once you start getting out of that definition, then you are suspect to going anywhere. So get what is clear in regard to what are rights in the context of this continent.
Thank you so much for that response. That Africa has to be clear and have to have a stand, because if you don't stand for anything, you can fall for anything. Thank you so much. Dr. Chega, you have the floor. Please unmute and ask your question.
The question to Patricia is, can you just say a little bit on the concepts of the political rights that the freedoms that the West puts on us, and which is the legal aspects, and the social, economic, and cultural rights, which actually to some extent deal with the moral issues, education, food, our children who are working in our cocoa farms, but America allows a lot of illegal immigrants to cross the border and work in their farms. But those are not considered rights issues in the US. For us here in Africa, if I get my 12-year-old son to work with me in my farm after he closes from school or on weekends, it's considered to be a violation of rights, and therefore they would not want to buy my cocoa or food. So I just want you to comment on the two sides of the coin: civil and political rights vis-a-vis social, economic, cultural rights, which I think are more fundamental to Africa at its level of development.
Thank you.
I'll just put thank you. Should I respond to that or I should wait?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Doctor. One of the things that many of us would know, or some people are getting to know, is it has tried to be a divide within the whole human rights, a lack of a word to use, whole human rights movement, where there are divisions on civil and political rights, with the West supporting civil and political rights, arguing that they're very easy to implement, they're instant and all these things, which hasn't been a view for Africa. Africa, from the onset, prioritized economic, social, and cultural rights because they are quite, relevant to what we're going through. I just want to point out that having looked around, no, I cannot point out to any state that has a clean record in the promotion and protection of human rights. The last time we checked, America did not have a national human rights institution, or, some people argue it's federal government, but they did not have any of those frameworks. So the human rights promotion and protection, even in the United States, across any country, is not perfect. So that is one of the key areas I just want to highlight. In form of, I keep on going back to the fact that Africa has to have its narrative. Yes. Africa needs a narrative, and we need the correct narrative. And for me, it wouldn't be pushing our civil and political rights, because these are completely interdependent with economic and social. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Dr. Chega, you can put down your hand. And I think if nobody else has a question, I have a question. Okay, let me allow Peter Kaliango to please go. Dr. Chega, can you put your hand down? Peter, please unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah. My question is actually twofold. I'm just seeking for advice or trying to guide. But when you look at these two areas of human rights and also corruption, you discover that, for instance, in Uganda, this area of corruption, it has been sung by so many people, especially the president. He has actually talked about the idea of fighting corruption for a long time, but it appears like he is not progressing in any way, because corruption continues to happen almost in each and every sector of the government. But my idea would be that for a subject like this, if it can be taken to as low as maybe a primary school or even nursery school, such that these children are taught this area of corruption, the after effects of corruption, all the way from nursery school, primary school. Maybe if it was to become an integral part of their training, it would somehow change the trend of corruption, especially in Uganda or in Africa. In the area of human rights, I'm meant to understand that in developed countries, the subject of human rights is taught all the way from childhood. I don't know whether it is also happening in Uganda or in Africa. So my idea is that, in a nutshell, that these two areas of corruption and human rights, for them to make sense and stick in our mind, for me, I feel this kind of seminal training, it should start all the way from childhood, from nursery school, primary school, because if it is brought to people like us, the grown-ups, it becomes very, very difficult to change a grown-up, just like it is happening in Uganda, for instance,
Thank
because
you.
Uganda, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. Thank you, Peter. I see, I think you didn't have a question. That was a comment, right, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, thank you so much once again for that comment. Indeed, if training in this area started, because charity does begin at home and it should begin from the beginning, I think Africa would be in a better place, certainly. Can I have Dr. Alabo unmute and please go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I want to first of all start by thanking our facilitators for doing a great job, doing justice to the topic at hand. It was quite compelling, to use your word. I like particularly the example that Patricia cited with respect to how what happened to the idea of providing water to the community without even consulting the women. And so that gives us some clear value for the 5 principles that you enumerated, panel. And also when Dr. Rosalie came in, you know, what you had to talk particularly about the victims of corruption and human rights violation, how the absence of justice could be addressed. But my question is this, you know, I would like you, from your rich experience, and I know you have a lot over the years, you have been dealing with various aspects of these 3 concepts: human rights, corruption, and development. You know, what will you leave with our students in terms of practical examples of your experiences? What will you share with them? Can we go in that tangent a little bit so that, you know, the examples that you give will remain with them for forever? If you can share some with us, I think even those of us who are enjoying this lecture will have some very incisive things to take away, if you can, please.
Thank you, Dr. Alabo. Is your question addressed to Patricia or to Dr.
Both of them. I said both of them.
Okay.
Both of them.
So, Dr. Roslyn, please go ahead first.
Dr. Otto, I think you are asking for examples from our rich experience on how people can get justice in the areas of corruption and violation of human rights. Is that it?
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
Yes. Of course, when we were painting the picture, we didn't get into the good stories, and I think you want to hear about the good stories. and some of the good stories we have, I will share what has been done at the Human Rights Commission. And I know that Ghana also has a national human rights institution. I'm not sure how it is labeled, but you have a national human rights institution that promotes and protects human rights. I do remember one of the former chairpersons training us on how to handle tribunals. Now, I worked with the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and basically it does three things. One is to investigate allegations of human rights violations. So if a citizen has a problem, they can go and report, and the violation of this right will be investigated. And if it is found that indeed a right was violated, then they will pass it on to the tribunal for hearing, and it can be determined. And I can assure you that over the years, at least during my tenure, I remember handling over 1,000 cases. Not all of them ended up in the tribunal. Some of them we handled through mediation, and then others were actually handled by the tribunal, and awards were given to victims of torture. Of course, some of them were slow in coming, but they did come. Unfortunately, some victims died before they saw anything, but the awards did come in and people were compensated. If you don't go, if there is no redress if you don't go to the UHRC or the national institution, you can also go to court. There have been very many cases where victims of human rights violations have been assisted. NGOs are doing their work. For me, a good story that that I can rejoice in and that I was happy to see was of one torture victim who was awarded, I believe, was it about 200 million Ugandan shillings? Of course, money can never really cover what has happened to the person. But what I was happy about is that the person that was tortured was given the money, although shortly after they died, and perhaps the money went to his wife and children. But the fact that somebody was brought to book, that helps. In terms of other good stories, not daily, sometimes we don't have cases, but daily now, if you look at our website at the Leadership Court Tribunal, you can go on our website, you'll find that we have fined those who have not declared their assets. We have asked that those who abused their office, those who abused government property, we've asked that they make good of the property that they destroyed. And the other thing is that we've also asked that they lose their jobs or they be demoted. And there's a list of some of the cases we've handled. Of course, we are not the only actor in the corruption field. There are those good stories that are going on in other places. You can look out for our sister institutions, like the Inspector General of Government. They are always working on cases. There's also the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, which is similar to like the Special Investigations Unit in South Africa, which are also bringing public officials to book. But I want to agree with Kalyango. I think it was Kalyango who was saying, you know what, let's start educating people right from the nursery level and things like that. For me, Mr. Kalyango, I would go as far as saying that let us educate our people right from home, right from home. The pastor once told us a story, a few weeks ago, our pastor told a story of corruption. And he said that the school asked the students to pay 5,000 shillings for a photo for the school magazine or something. The kid told the mother the child went and told the mother that, Mommy, the school asked for 10,000 for the photo. The child doubled. Then the mother told the father that the school asked for 20,000. So the father was, the father was like, how much? I mean, the amount seemed so ridiculous. It kept being doubled and tripled, and the father was like, but how can a mere photo take so much? Then it was found out that each of those people was adding to it, even the child, even the mother. So I believe that these values, these human rights values, these anti-corruption values, they need to start in the home. And we need to look back, because after colonialism, there is a way we thought that of course, some of our cultures were bad. Some of our cultures were bad, but there were some cultures that were really, really good, where we looked out for each other, where we lived in communities and we knew we are brother and sister and you could not harm another. And even the way we would punish ourselves when we did wrong. When I did research on the death penalty, it was not a common thing. We were not eager to kill each other just because somebody has killed. They would do a ceremony which was, reconciliatory, and people would stay together. But of course, with the new, after colonialism, we developed a new justice system. Sometimes I think which we cannot quite connect with, and that is why we end up a bit lost. So I believe that if we can combine our traditional justice system and the justice system that we inherited, we can get a system where we can get redress for victims. If we remain purely with this textbook approach, or this is what the law says and this is how it's going to be, and we forget our roots, that our roots are embedded in that reconciliatory approach, that rehabilitative approach, then we are going to miss it. I might speak the whole night. I see Sika looking up. Maybe she's about to say your time is up, but
No,
that's all I can share for now.
I'm fascinated. No, I'm fascinated by what you're saying.
For now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr.
So
Roslyn. I'm really fascinated by what you're saying, because it segues into the question that I have, and I just will jump in and then give Frank the chance to ask his question. Is that, you talk about allowing or combining our traditional justice systems with what is happening more in the modern times in our countries or in our systems. But what do you say to somebody who, understands that rent seeking is our system of resource distribution, so that a minister or an MP is expected to personally bankroll his village or bankroll all his extended family and so on and so forth. And so therefore, this person feels the need to get those resources from somewhere. What do you say to that situation or scenario? Dr. Roslyn, I'm back at you.
Yes, thank you so much. I actually, it's not that I want people to read my thesis, but I actually addressed this issue in my thesis. It was interesting because I found out, members of parliament are supposed to help. Their major role is legislation. Their major role is to make laws. But because people are not aware of what their role is, and even the MPs don't clarify on their role. First of all, they're the ones who make the mistake. When they are campaigning, they make these outrageous promises. I'm going to build a road, I'm going to I'll build a hospital, I'll fix this, I'll fix that. When your role is really to only make laws. Now, or at least have oversight over government. But when you start to purport to do these things, of course, people are going to demand that from you, because that is the expectation you have given the people. So I would like MPs to be honest and say, no, we cannot do that. I had only one MP, and he's here in Uganda, who, when he was campaigning, he said, I'm not going to promise you that I'll build roads because that is not my work. And it is important that people say that. And, in Uganda, and just like I believe in Ghana or elsewhere, it is about catering for paying for people's funerals, contributing to weddings, contributing to parties. That is not the role of the MP. If the MP could do their work in having oversight over government and making sure that it is accountable in terms of providing the basic services of healthcare, of housing, of education, then they don't have to be picking up the bills for people. But instead of making sure that they do it at a national level, they become heroes for a few people, and then they strain themselves. It is important that also us, we elect people who know what they are going to do, not people who will try to steal and give us little handouts. We need people who are nationalistic. We need people who have the heart for people. We need genuine leaders who are out to help the populace instead of putting out handouts. While that looks good on the whole, it is hypocritical, and it is also self-promotion and preservation. You should be able to empower people. If you're doing anything, it should be for the well-being, such that this person is independent and empowered to provide for themselves. So I'm against those kinds of MPs who give out handouts. Of course, if somebody's in dire need, do so, but I would want the MP to think of a long-term solution. They said the best thing to do for a person is not to give them fish, but is to actually teach them and give them a fishing rod so that they're able to fish and get it for themselves.
Thank you.
That would be my take.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosling. That was well said. Can I have Frank Irumba and
Yes. Good evening.
Ask you.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies. Thank you for the informative.
Frank, are you still with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Frank?
There was a lot of information there, and
can you unmute? Okay, go ahead.
But I thought,
please go ahead. We can barely hear you.
No, we can hear him well.
We can't hear you.
Mr. Frank, kindly go ahead, sir. Shika has a problem with her line.
Okay.
We could hear him very well. I don't know what's happening.
Meeting is being recorded.
He's muted.
my question is, what is the score of Uganda in terms of human rights and also corruption? And also, I am concerned, who is refereeing corruption when the non-referees are corrupt? Who is refereeing them? If we get the very people who are supposed to referee, who are supposed to prevent or to catch those in corrupt practices, doing corrupt practices, who again, apprehends them? Then, in terms of human rights, Patricia talked about a stand. I see that even in African countries, we have many stands, different stands, and there is a weakness of some people leaning to one side and others leaning to another side. And it's a whole confusion. We don't have a single stand. They are a long-term solution. I thank you for the actions taken so far and the education you are giving us. But there are many people also who do not have, who are ignorant about how to go about this. Is there a way we can benchmark the people with who score very high in human rights and those who score very high in preventing corruption? Thank you very much.
You're muted.
So should we respond to it, Rose?
Yeah, maybe the question on corruption. I think he wanted to know where we lie. I think we were at 26 or 27. I was trying to check the actual figure, but it's not a good one. 26%, 27%, that is a bad figure. So we are not doing that well. We are below 50. We only improved by 1 mark. We are not doing well in terms of corruption. You asked, so who will, who will oversee those who are overseeing corruption, who are also corrupt? That's an interesting question. But by and large, every anti-corruption mechanism has a supervisory body over it. And if you feel that that corruption institution has corrupt people and they need to be gotten rid of, you need to go to the supervisor. So it's not like there is nobody to check those who are being corrupt. Of course, one of the key institutions to check the other arms of government is Parliament. But sometimes you will notice that, for example, in Parliament, it is about, it's people who vote people into Parliament. So you will find that there are people who are in Parliament who shouldn't be in Parliament, and they may not provide effective oversight over those. So again, it starts with having the awareness of who to vote for, because who you vote for will ultimately reflect the standard you've chosen. So we are where we are because of the people we have chosen to lead us. That's what I could speak about in brief. I'll leave the human rights question to Pat.
Thank you, Rosalind. For the human rights question, where is Uganda ranking? I've not yet seen ranks in regard to human rights. But I will say there are different aspects of rights where we notice certain countries obviously are much ahead of Uganda. If you look at most of the Nordic countries, their healthcare systems are very strong and etc. So you find that actually most countries are a mixed bag, lack of a better way to say that. So some are very strong economic, social, others are strong on civil and political. So in form of ranking, there are no ranks. The assessments that are done yearly, just know that human rights is such a wide field. So assessments are done yearly, but that's not also graded. What you can do is when you read into various reports, you can know from the challenges that as a country we're not doing very well. I think that would be the quickest answer. The fact that Africa doesn't have a narrative, yes, you're right. Yes, on the other hand, it's a mixed bag because certain African nations have a specific stand on certain issues. And you'll even find that just voting on certain issues, you find that certain African nations and surprisingly the Arab world are going to vote a certain way in regard to certain issues. So I'm not disputing that there may be points of, departure, but very strong. As Uganda, what are we saying? What is Uganda saying? What is Kenya saying? And I think that those should take the lead. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Speaker, allow me. I've seen a question addressed to me in the chat. Says, thank you for outlining some of the different bodies in Uganda, but what is the advantage of having multiple bodies? And Elizabeth, you ask a valid question, because one wonders if we have multiple bodies, maybe we are spreading out our resources too thin, and at the end we may be ineffective. The other is that if you have only a few, maybe some may not do their work. The advantages to having multiple, in that people can specialize, because corruption is really, really wide. It has very, very many aspects, and you'd be surprised. You see now there's a state house unit handling, corruption on taxes. There's something handling on investment. There's general corruption. I think that the multiple bodies are a sign of a bad situation, that things are tight. But it's also a sign that somebody is trying to make it right. And the advantage is that if they are multiple and each one does their specific area well, then we will tackle the problem. Because the problem with having a wide mandate for one institution is that certain aspects will be covered while others won't be. So the advantage, if any, if you ask of having of multiple bodies, is that these multiple bodies will be specialized and they're handling a specific aspect of corruption. For example, for us, we are handling the leadership code of conduct, and you will find the anti-corruption court is handling the anti-corruption act, those offenses that come under there. So it is hoped that that kind of specialization works well for the country, that people are able to move in and actually solve the problem. That is the hope of the multiple bodies. Because when you give it all to one institution, they may not be able to cover all aspects, because it's a wide thing. So the advantage with having multiple is that they will be tackling a specific area, and if they can do their work well, then in that specific area we will be able to see improvements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosalind, and thank you so much, Patricia. We really enjoyed the food for thought that you have given us. I think these topics together are very heavy, weighty matters: development, human rights, and corruption in Africa. Very weighty matters, and you've done justice. I'm sure everyone would agree to the topic. In the interest of the fact that you guys are 2 hours ahead of us and we're almost 2 hours into our presentation, I would like to suggest, if nobody else has a question, that we bring our presentation or our seminar to an end. And on that note, I would like to once again thank everyone for coming, each and every one, the student body, our president, our vice president, our faculty members, the members of the trusts and the board of the school, as well as invited guests from as far as South Africa and Uganda, and so all these other places that have joined us. Thank you so much for coming. Now I would like to ask, and particularly I want to thank Dr. Roslyn and Miss Patricia, whom I earlier called doctor, which means that, Patricia, we are expecting you to join us in the PhD program so that you can end the title. I would like to now call upon one of the students, Prophet Godwin Safu, who is going to give us the Safu Anand, who is going to give us the closing prayer and remarks. Please unmute and go ahead, Prophet.
Thank you very much, Sika, for
Prophet, you are breaking up.
Appreciate our resource resource persons for depth of knowledge and wisdom displayed tonight. Imbibe some of these principles. Yeah. Hello.
Yes, you are breaking up. Now we can hear you.
All right. So we want to thank our resource persons for the depth of knowledge and the insight granted us tonight. And attention has to do with the, as Patricia saying, putting individuals at the center of developmental planning is a real deal. My rector almost took my important point out of my mouth, where he said that in most cases, women are not worried about the distance at which they cover to fetch water, but sometimes a place for discussion or discussing domestic issues, marital issues, and avenue to heal, to speak, and to be heard. That indeed will stay with me for the rest of my life. Dr. Roslyn also mentioned that corruption indeed weakens the rule of law. And I wanted to find out from the beginning how this staying in power for a long time affects corrupt status of nations. However, justice was done to the topic, and we did appreciate that. She also mentioned that corruption is a major deal in Africa, and that is why we at Salt University College are taught to be transformative and servant leaders going forward in changing our communities and wherever we find ourselves. We truly appreciate the meeting that was held. Faculty members and everyone. On this note, I want us to pray. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be at your feet and for bless us with such knowledge. We pray that, Lord, that you bless our resources in the near future. When we call on them, they will still think my line keep breaking. Take over.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend. We had parts of your prayer, but we know God heard everything. Thank you so much for praying for us. And once again, I want to thank Dr. Roslyn and Miss Patricia for graciously accepting our invitation and for doing justice to a topic that is very, very a hot topic on the continent of Africa. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Thank you and good night. I believe it's almost 10 o'clock in Uganda right now. So I would say good night to you all. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Yo, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.